Today I'm going to talk about the MVP for ELeague Boston Major. And there's been some discussion about it, so I just thought I'd bring up my own thoughts. The main three candidates that have been put forward so far have been Skadoodle, Tarek, and Guardian. And my first initial reaction was it was Skadoodle right after the finals, just because Cloud9 had run through the hardest bracket of the tournament. He'd been pretty good throughout the entire tournament, but uh, if you think about the rest of the team, so I'm thinking like Stewie, Automatic, and Tarek. There's actually an equal argument to be made for all of them as MVPs because they were all equally or as good as Skadoodle during that run throughout, which kind of like points to the fact that all of Cloud9 showed up. I think there's some weird statistic where like all of them are really close in like overall rating on the HLTV rating, which kind of correlates to how well they all five of them played throughout the entire tournament. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, for me, the MVP means the most valuable player, as in this one guy did the most work and he changed the fate of his team, or was as close to changing it as any one man could. So, for instance, if you trade him with let's say you trade Guardians, because this is who I'm talking about, Guardian with Skadoodle. I don't think Skadoodle is able to do what Guardian did, whereas I'm pretty sure Guardian could have done what Skadoodle did in a strange way, even though they don't play the same kind of styles, if you know what I mean. And obviously, the phase run wasn't as epic as the Cloud9 run. Just going into the finals, Cloud9 beat G2 and SK, whereas FaZe beat Mouse and Navi. And after the first game against Mouse, it was kind of like a wash, and then the Navi game wasn't particularly competitive. So what ends up happening is when you go into the finals, there's Guardian's actually in a similar situation if you're talking about the MVP candidacy as Skadoodle, and the fact that a lot of the players on his team could have been MVP. Olaf Meister could have been MVP. Nico could have been MVP. If Rain had showed up, he could have been MVP in the finals. And so you end up in this situation where I think the finals performance is what kind of the ultimate factor in this particular case. So this is a bit different from the ELeague Atlanta Major, where even though KRB was the best player in the finals, or the most impactful player in the finals, I actually thought like Device was the best overall player of that tournament. But the reason why KRB was given that MVP by a majority of people was because that was the match where elimination was the most likely. I'm one of those people who doesn't think that's the case. I actually think like if Device hadn't shown up, I think that team might have been eliminated in the group stages because they were pretty shaky, and there were like chances they could have been taken out in the quarterfinals or semifinals even. So yeah, definitely think Device was the MVP of that tournament. Anyway, back to this. So in order to define why I think Guardian is the MVP, we have to look at the overall matchup of the finals between FaZe and Cloud9. So I'll break it down in the highest order first, which is, I think, map pick. So the three maps that end up coming out are Mirage, Overpass, and Inferno. And obviously Mirage is contested between the two of them. I think they're both very good Mirage team maps. Overpass should have been favored for FaZe, and then Inferno was as Thorne pointed out, a smart pick by Cloud9 in the sense that FaZe weren't as good. And my reasoning is more like, I think FaZe's cash was a lot stronger this tournament than it was in previous tournaments. So I think FaZe might have preferred Cash, and I actually thought FaZe might have picked Cash instead of Overpass for the second map just to fuck with Cloud9 a bit, because Cloud9 had already shown they could play some Overpass against G2, whereas I'm almost certain like Cloud9 like was afraid of playing Cash to a certain extent. So I actually thought that should have, actually thought that might have been a potential second pick, but obviously because of the historical data, Overpass is the much safer pick, and under normal circumstances, you can say, and I think you can still say, FaZe should be favored on Overpass against Cloud9 if they meet up. In terms of stylistic matchup, because this is also important when we're trying to break down the MVP, because you have to figure out what are the victory conditions for both teams. So in terms of stylistically, the way the two teams play, they're actually kind of similar. I personally think they're kind of similar. Both heavily rely on individual skill. They're both kind of like specialists on certain maps. They both have a more free. There's like a basic team structure and basic teamwork, but it's much more based off of playing off of like what the situation is given to you. So for instance, if like somebody makes a pick, they instantly, or somebody gets information, they instantly like call out a move. That's more Cloud9 style, and whereas like the FaZe style is similar except slower. Like if somebody makes a pick, somebody makes a move, that kind of like forces the rest of the team to rotate and change where they're going because of the map information gained or map information taken. So it's more of an overwhelming slow style from FaZe, but they do have a bunch of explosive strats, and Cloud9 is kind of the opposite, where they're much more fast paced, much more high tempo, but they can slow it down too. So you look at the relative like skills of the team, it's not unfair to say that Cloud9 is like a weaker FaZe, just in terms of stylistically how they approach the game. And then they both actually have a similar weakness too. Both of them are prone to losing to ecos or force buys, and in terms of calling, I actually think they both also have a similar weakness in that if they don't really get the momentum on the T side, they kind of like run out and stall out of ideas if it hits into a rough spot. And then the final bit of information that's kind of relevant here is that FaZe do have a kind of specialty in Kerrigan in the sense that he's always been very good at using fakes. And this actually comes into play later because Cloud9 in Inferno didn't bite on any of his fakes. So when we go into the finals itself, then right. So just the way I've broken the stylistic matchup down, you have to break down the team strengths or how the teams are kind of assembled. So FaZe has basically runs 2.5 stars kind of. What I mean by that is like their two main stars are going to be Guardian and Eco, and then Rain is like their third option because Rain's basically in an entry role now, so it's kind of hard to be consistent in that role. But obviously he's been like they're one of their best players, or arguably one of the best players in the last few months. So he's obviously a third star. Olaf Meister, he does have some aggression in him, but for the most part, he's more of the glue guy. He's helping. He's more of the support. He's more of the supportive end. He's helping the other teammates. He's playing off of like Kerrigan when they play off the sites, and then obviously Kerrigan's the leader. He might have some impact every once in a while in terms of a clutch, but you're not expecting a huge fragging performance or necessarily a lot of impact from him consistently. Cloud9, on the other hand, Tarek has been their best player for the last few months. I think it was I think you should have expected him to show up, and he did. Stewie, he should have been a star, but ever since shifting over from the entry fragger to like a more of a wing position, his impact has kind of fallen down. And and honestly, when like they were going down 0-2 in the group stages, that was more in line with what I saw from Stewie in the past few months. But then on the third day, and then from that day forward, he showed up in a huge way, and he seems to have really found a place in this team with like his old play style, but in a different position. And honestly, like in terms of styles, Tarek and Stewie seem to think about the game in the same way. So that's great. Automatic has been a consistent factor for the team throughout a majority of its for Cloud9, both in this iteration and the past iteration. But if you look at the direct matchup versus FaZe, he's always been missing. So he's generally third star. So those are your 3 stars, which are actually all rifling stars, but all of them can like do some secondary op work if they have to. Then you have Skadoodle, which is which has been called a supportive opper. Basically holds his angles, gets his shots, doesn't really get the impactful kills, just gets like the 1 kill and then falls off, and then kind of helps set up the team for the retake or something like that. Or maybe if you take the site, he's pretty good at holding the post plant, and I'd say he was surprisingly good in the 1vx situations for more than you would expect anyway. And then Rush was the supportive end. He had been in the entry star fragger at the end of 2016, but ever since like Stanislaw left Optic, his form went kind of shit. But he seems to have found a renewed strength in being a supportive player, and he can actually pop off a lot stronger. So in that position, when he doesn't have to carry, I guess. So you look at the way these 2 teams are formed. The way you would normally think of FaZe is you absolutely are going to get Guardian and Nico into the game. Rain is maybe 50 to 70%. Like Olaf Meister, he'll show up in the game. He'll show up in the game, but he won't usually have that much of an impact, except for this tournament where he was fucking huge. And then you have Kerrigan, who you shouldn't be expecting much. And in the finals, basically, you only get 2 of those you only get like 3 of those 5 factors and the wrong 3. You get Guardian, obviously, which is great, but you have Rain missing half the time. And what I mean by that is Mirage, he only showed up on T side, and then he didn't really show up at all in Inferno. And then Nico only had some good rounds in Overpass and some okay rounds in the third map, but overall I'd say this was a bad performance from Nico, and not really the Nico of 2017, the guy who could be rightly be called the best player in the world if there's a case for that, certainly. Olaf Meister actually raised his game. I actually think he's been underrated for how good he played throughout the tournament and in the finals, especially when you consider like this has basically been a role change since going from Fnatic to FaZe. And then Kerrigan's about what you can expect as an in-game leader, or what you can expect from his performance as an in-game leader overall. I'd say he did underperform as a caller on the third map, but even then, I don't know if you can call it the primary factor. It is a factor. I'd say Nico not showing up is the biggest factor, because Nico is the most consistent point of the team, and the fact that he didn't show up is a huge problem. Became a huge problem for FaZe, even though, let's be real, not many people make that first jump, so I can't really blame him. Not very few players in the history of all of esports have been able to show up that big for a major finals or like a world title the first time around. Very few have. So I don't blame him, but he's definitely, I think, my number 1 factor as to why FaZe lost this finals. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because basically what's happening is throughout the 3 maps, basically with Rain and Nico gone, you really only have Guardian and Olaf Meister. And like I've pointed out, Olaf Meister, he's not being put in those positions where he can have a huge impact on the game. But despite that, he is having pretty good impact on the game as a supportive end player, or sometimes he could even break. He even had some rounds where he like broke open rounds, like getting 2 kills in a row, but Cloud9 like would take it back, stuff like this. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because this leaves, as players, right? Rain, when you think about him, he's always getting the opening picks on both sides of the map. CT side, you think of Overpass and Toilets. Like T side as an entry fragger. Nico is a great lurker. He's a great playmaker. He's great at clutches. He's great at holding sites. But all this shit is gone. And so you're basically left with Guardian kind of like holding down a collapsing ship by himself, because he's like the only other star player who's performing at the level that they need for that they need to win. And I think if Guardian doesn't go ham on the first map, this could have easily been a 2-0 victory for Cloud9. Guardian had a huge performance. I think he broke a record of like 25 off kills in the first map, which actually kind of underrates his performance because it's not even like they were just regular off kills. A lot of them were like really hard shots. A lot of them were high pressure shots. A lot of them were shots where if he missed, like Cloud9 wins the game. So I think Guardian was like a god on that map, and he was a god on the third map too. And he's like the biggest reason as to why, like if FaZe had, he was the biggest reason, and he was the biggest reason as to why FaZe was made this series so close, and why they won the first map, and why they maybe could have won the third map, or why at points, right? Whereas on the other side of the equation, when you look at the 5 players, the only player that didn't show up for a little bit was Stewie on the first map. But after that, everybody showed up. Everybody played the role. Everybody had like star performances, and that's kind of like the crux of the argument here. Is basically, if we're just looking at the finals, and if you try to break it down, I think there's a pretty good case where I could say Stewie was the MVP for Cloud9 in that finals because he was the one who won who held B site on Inferno at the very end with its op, and that was one of the biggest reasons as to why they got to overtime and why they won that game. Skadoodle, obviously everybody knows why they picked him, but HLTV picked Tarek, and Tarek's actually a pretty good choice, to be honest. He was very good throughout the entire tournament, very good in the finals. He had huge moments within the finals, and was one of the reasons as to why they clutched it out. But nobody mentioned it, but Automatic also could have been an MVP candidate for Cloud9, and that's kind of the point. On one side, you had like 4 of the 5 members of Cloud9 going ham, and then on the other side, you had 2 of the 5 members of FaZe going hard, but only one of them is a star, and then the other one is Olaf Meister, which is kind of like at best a hybrid, but mostly a supportive end player. So that's why you would have to. That's why I personally favor Guardian as the MVP of this tournament, because he was the most valuable player among the 2 different teams. I will say that Skadoodle showing up was huge just because the differential between what you expect from him from the last year and what he showed up with here was larger, but this is like an absolute value. It's like Guardian was playing at 10 out of 10 level, and the previous months he was playing at like a 9 out of 10 level, whereas Skadoodle was probably playing at like a 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10, and when he showed up to this tournament, to this finals, he played like a 9 out of 10, and so you think in your mind, oh man, he leveled up so much, but I still think Guardian overall as a player, in terms of impact, in terms of kills, in terms of what he had of like all the like mitigating factors of underperformances from his team, he was the best player in the server, best player in the tournament, but he didn't win that major. So those are the reasons as to why I think Guardian is the MVP of the ELeague Boston Major. See you next time.